morning, everyone. Welcome to our new episode of Future of Cloud Optimization. Today, I have Jordan Chernev with me. He has been heading the global platforms at Wayfair, have built a few awesome developer platforms there. Welcome, Jordan, to the show.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me on this podcast. Happy to be here.
Jordan, you have an extensive experience building developer platforms, and cost is also one of your primary focus. So, how do you do that together?
In order for you to have successful developer platform, especially in a cloud native paradigm, I think the biggest shift in thinking for teams should be you need to move away from a technology oriented North Star or a mindset, backlogs that are technology oriented, and then you want to switch over to an end user focus that people often refer to as an actual customer journey. Hey, what is the actual customer experience? The different parts of experience, going through an actual workflow or interacting with your platform, if you will. I recommend that you also identify what the total addressable market is within the organization. Maybe for some teams it's 50, for others it's thousands of engineers across hundreds of product teams, which are sitting in different time zones with different local cultures and subcultures. The basic idea is you want to capture some initial customer profiles, and you also want to size each cohort as a part of that exercise. As you get to actually get into customer empathy sessions, you want to capture what are the current pain points, what are the problem statements, user stories that could actually add meaningful impact and value to the actual software development lifecycle of a given product team. I recommend that, and I don't necessarily see that called out as frequently, but I do recommend that as you going through these conversations to leverage second order thinking. Hey, if this were true, meaning if this magically were different, then what happens? What does this enable for you? You basically want to jump to hey, you're trying to explore if this is an actual real need or if this is just something that could potentially be a transitional or transactional pain points that may or may not necessarily have as much value at scale, if you will. Obviously, you want to focus on getting a buy-in at the senior leadership level. There are different ways that you can do that, but you also want to appeal to your technical and non-technical stakeholders and the actual practitioners. You want to make sure that you're positioning your message to that is relatively similar in terms of core and essence, but you also want to project it and reframe it slightly different because each one of these different types of audiences will need to consume it in a different fashion so it resonates with them. So make sure that your message is appropriate for the right audience. As you're going for this experience, obviously you want to pilot, you want to identify teams for early pilots. Those are going to be your early adopters that quickly allow you to confirm your hypothesis around MVPs, anything that could potentially be doable or a misstep or doesn't necessarily add value. It allows you to iterate quickly, pretty much similar, to how you would be doing a normal, software application development. Don't be shy about failing fast in any of this. It's unlikely that you're going to time the internal quote unquote marketplace. We will be either right on time. You may be a little bit early, you might be a little bit late. Over time, that is going to course correct on its own. So don't feel like you have to hit it precisely. It's unlikely that it happens at the very beginning. Once you're successful with maybe 1 to 5 pilot teams, then you can start scaling the pattern. So basically for traditional 0 to 1 going to market playbook, then 1 to 10, and then after that you can scale it from 10 to 100 and then thousands if you like. It's also important as you're going through this journey that you're tracking success metrics. Some of these are adoption rates for the platform, actual NPS. Some of them are also key customer outcomes. Cost could be one of them. It could be a number of incidents. It could be how fast you're deploying and being able to roll back codes during an actual incident. It could be you optimizing for a particular SLA or SLI that has been identified from both technical and non-technical stakeholders. So that part of the key customer outcomes, you might be able to sort of tweak and adjust to what the actual organizational needs are, if you will. Sometimes it could even allow you to deliver a very powerful message that says, hey, VP of engineering or CTO, by teams using the platform, they could deliver value a lot more quickly. So we can deliver on 2 extra strategic initiatives in the next calendar year with the same team size in terms of headcount. So that is extremely powerful, and you can enable additional strategic initiatives without necessarily requiring headcount. And obviously, as you're kind of like, doing all of this by optimizing for the developer experience, your time to value, quality and reliability, innovation, you're indirectly improving the overall customer experience. And I think that's kind of like, a very important part of the value messaging that platform team should be kind of like, sharing across the enterprise. In addition, cost efficiency directly increases the impact on the organization's P&L or profitability goals. Right now, we kind of see like, what the macro is and everybody's trying to kind of achieve to durable, scalable profitability. So I think those are kind of like, I would say like, the best practices that I would consider.
Jordan, on the customer experience side, when you focus really on the customer experience aspect, how do you make sure that cost optimization doesn't really affect or impact it negatively?
I think first you have to like, start by categorizing in the individual like, applications within the environment by using the service tiers, right? And when they say service tiers, hey, is this like, a tier one critical service, tier two, tier three? You want to make sure that you have well-defined user-oriented SLIs and SLO targets that the business agrees with. This is basically your line of demarcation of, hey, if I'm potentially like, optimizing, am I fitting into like, the good area, which is where you start violating those like, well-established targets, but you want to have that as your baseline. Usually, depending on the implementation, it's not uncommon for most unoptimized public cloud deployments that could have anywhere between 30 to 50% in terms of like, opportunity across compute, storage, networking, maybe even enterprise support. That piece is relatively small, but sometimes it could be negotiable if, as well. You want to be mindful about replacement opportunities for select workloads that sometimes like, public cloud providers could incentivize, meaning, hey, if you have a compute workload that is running on, I don't know, let's call it like, VMs or VM like workloads, maybe you get incentives to switch that over to a cloud native SKU that's the public cloud provider is trying to get more monetization on. And you should be aware of those trends. So maybe you could leverage that as a part of your negotiation. After that, it's basically you're looking for choosing tools and frameworks that allow you to repeat the cycle of discovering of opportunities, implementing them, and iterating while you're consistently monitoring for any SLA breaches. That effectively allows you to get pretty close to like, fully optimized, maybe 80 to 90% of the way, but without necessarily crossing over into what potentially could create negative experience for any internal or external customer of a given like, piece of software. And it's important that this is not a one-time exercise that we're talking about. This needs to be a more of a regular discipline that you establish a rigor. In other words, it needs to be a part of the team's culture, incentives, and goals. And you should incentivize that during regular, I don't know, organizational activities like performance management, calibration, promotions. This is usually an area of a big opportunity or big miss where organizations don't necessarily provide the right avenue, the right incentives for engineers to be recognized for this type of hygiene, which would actually be a very, very big unlock for the business.
When we start a project or a team to build a feature, you mentioned about like embedding one engineer there who understands optimization capabilities and pulling him out probably after a year. How has it worked? What was the impact?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting case. I'm glad that you're bringing up that topic. We had an interesting challenge at the time. We were coming from a more, I would say, like, classic way of thinking of you have a particular team within technology that is quote unquote incentivized with being the owner of the costs for the organization within the public cloud, not necessarily of software, but the public cloud domain. And then that didn't necessarily create the right types of incentives for actual product teams to be able to sort of learn, discover what are the types of like, ergonomics, how does the cloud actually work in terms of unit economics, or like, how it can make it scale, how can you be a really good steward of the organization's sort of like, expenditures, if you will. We also had the additional challenge of we had to create this practice over hundreds of teams across different time zones, meaning it's not something that we would be able to kind of like, sit down in person, create the in-person face-to-face relationships with each individual group. And obviously it's a model that we need to be able to scale across hundreds of groups. So you kind of like, started on a whim. We had the idea of like, hey, what if we decided to embed an actual DevOps or a public cloud practitioner who already has the right type of experience or expertise in terms of understanding how to do the cloud cost optimization. Let's embed him with an actual product team or a department where we can sort of like borrow a page from the SRE best practices around you're here on a short-term engagement, usually anywhere between 3 to 6 months. Your goal is to educate and make those teams to be more self-service. So you technically as that engagement comes to a conclusion, the team would be able to sort of self-service and have that expertise on their own, meaning they can be durable in the long term without necessarily requiring somebody else to kind of be providing that type of service for them. Now, at the time, given that the situation that we were in, education for public cloud cost mechanics wasn't as available within the environment, so we extended that from 6 months to 12 months. But if essentially the goalposts were the same, hey, for the first 3 months, this person is supposed to help you with discovery, education, making sure that you understand the fundamentals. Then months 3 to 6, they basically take a step back. They're still involved with the team, and then months 6 to 12, they become more of a uninformed advisor. They're there for you, but they become a little bit more and more hands off until in the actual very end. They're more or less either reviewing the work or basically saying, "Hey, the team is healthy. They're self sustaining. They can do that." That was a very successful model. We were able to identify some early adopters, pretty much following the same pattern that we described earlier. We identified some quick wins, and in some cases, some teams were able to capitalize on multi-million dollar cost reclaims, which was very powerful and a very strong story. And that effectively allowed us to sort of create enough of a positive news within the organization, and that allowed us to scale the program.
Basically, educate, transition, and then let them handle it. Perfect. When it comes to platform engineering as a group, in most companies, it's one group, a central group, and then there's teams, there's developer teams out there, right? So what do you think is the role of this platform engineering in cost? Is it FinOps, platform engineering, or is it the group, or is it all of us together?
To me, platform engineering provides a multitude and a wide range of activities. We touched upon some of these topics just a few minutes ago. Cloud cost consumption is one of the domains. If you're focusing on that pillar in particular, it's more around creating established guardrails, meaning even if team was sort of getting off the little the well-worn path or the golden path, if you will, they won't necessarily run into the challenge of unexpected cost overruns or runaway costs, which could be unbounded in terms of amount. So effectively, platform engineering allows it to sort of fall into success, or if you're sort of trying to push against those boundaries, you have the ability to sort of hey, I'm gonna hop off the platform, but I have an actual legitimate reason for me being able to do that. And that's okay. That's a supported pattern. And I don't think platforms should try to constrain. They should try to enable. But obviously, if you want to have that escape hatch, you want to make sure that your users know about it as an option. You're able to eliminate potential wastes, right? And again, while the platform can provide a technical capability, the culture within the organization in terms of incentives and goals is just as important. The platform can help you detect, surface, even make some code changes for you, scan, accept, and have those be deployed. In some cases, it may be easier for teams to stay on top of those opportunities. So as opposed to you potentially competing in opportunity costs or time with your product partner around business generating activities, you have a tool that basically allows you to be an opt-in and, hey, I'm going to use the data sets that is provided for me that I can extract from the public cloud providers APIs, or your specific workload. I can marry those data sets together, and based on these, I'm going to give you some recommendations. I'm going to generate some code for you. All we have to do is, yes, I'm going to press OK. Then the tool can basically implement some of these changes, and then they can deploy to production for you. Now, if you take it one step further, you don't necessarily have to target this at technical audiences. Maybe you have non-technical audiences, or people who are kind of sitting in the middle. Maybe it's product management, or system analysts or business analysts that can sort of perform those activities. So the platform can unlock those opportunities for a wider range of practitioners, if you will.
Now, AI in optimization, that's now the hot topic, right? What do you think is the role of AI, or significant role of AI in optimization initiatives?
I think AI can definitely help anyone marry different parts of the same problem space that it's a little bit disjointed. A huge part of cloud cost optimization happens in the negotiation of your actual contract. Usually, when I talk to practitioners, they think about optimizing storage, compute, network, public cloud SKUs after the contract has been signed. But you do have a lot of leverage during the actual discussion. This is where you kind of have a lot of different cross-functional teams sitting together. Maybe it's procurement, legal, finance, the particular teams who own a part of that spend, or elected nominees who are sort of driving that discussion. Maybe you have CIOs, CTOs, and maybe a CEO. Those are kind of the usual sort of archetypes involved in these discussions. What can the AI do for you? Well, those are fairly long running, potentially complex discussions because of the number of permutations, the number of cloud SKUs that you have to keep in track, especially if you have a medium to high level complexity in terms of size, or technology breadth and depth. It can be a fairly complicated, nuanced challenge for a single or even a group of practitioners who are focusing on this exercise to build and hold that mental model inside their sort of heads. This is where I think the AI could potentially help you optimize with specific language, or seeing specific opportunities for, hey, and this could be a risk, or that could be sort of a risk that you could avoid. Maybe you can calculate specific permutations on pricing and give it the right type of forecasting models that you might be looking for. Effectively, you would be creating more of a customized LLM that you're able to feed business forecasting data, public cloud costs data over time. So maybe you can see the different SKU fluctuations over months or days, or calendar years. So you can see what are the actual motivations of the public cloud provider at scale. We want to see which SKUs are a little bit more interesting for them to have more sales on, as opposed to not. What are the levers? Combining all of that and making sure that you infuse it, and even recommending specific legal language, that could be a really, really powerful area of opportunity that I don't think we have the tools or the products that do that today just yet. But to me, that would be a super, super valuable tool that could really unlock those engagements.
Now, getting to one more level advanced, like how about autonomy in optimization? Can there be a set of optimization executed by humans? And can there be a set of optimization executed by just machines?
Yeah, I think you touched on a topic that I mentioned opt-in earlier. You're basically saying, hey, let it be on autopilot. I think you definitely have an opportunity to be able to do that. The organization has to be comfortable with which types of workloads you are willing to sort of accept some of that. To be fair, a lot of this already happens within the organizations. They just don't realize it. The AI is, I don't know, the Kubernetes scheduler in terms of HP and VPA, but it's relatively small and confined, or a little bit more simplistic, if you will. So it's already happening at smaller scale. And maybe if you start combining a lot of these signals that I mentioned around maybe order volume, or revenue, or site hits, or I don't know, number of packages that you have sent this past week or upcoming this week. Maybe creating some of the real timeness allows it to be a lot more optimized, and maybe you can sort of have that a little bit of an arbitrage opportunity for you to provide margin benefits for just being so nimble in terms of cost optimizations. It's impractical for us to think about that humans would be able to kind of steer the ship in real time and be this level of nimble. Obviously, an AI based algorithm is probably a better fit, and you can actually achieve that level of margin.
Based on your current role in primary ventures, I'm sure you're talking to a lot of companies. What are the main challenges that they are facing?
Sure, it's an excellent question. Complexity in education is likely the biggest hurdle. Cloud cost is a cross-cutting discipline that encompasses the multiple business units that we talked about. Again, finance, legal, tech, procurement. To make it more complicated, the topic is both broad and deep. And it's not because the public cloud providers are trying to make it complicated. They're just trying to run a portfolio of products which have different product roadmaps that are different, maturation. And from a customer's perspective on the outside, and sometimes that could have the experience of feeling a little bit disjointed, meaning the actual products don't necessarily integrate as well as you would like. But yeah, it's usually around complexity in education. I used to joke, or refer prior to some of the technology advances, that it may take an actual individual who is focusing on public cloud cost economics, anywhere between 2 to 3 years for you to sort of like, be well versed and sort of understand the finer nuances, the complexities, the differences of SKUs or SKU families or anything that the public cloud providers are choosing to sort of like, do in terms of evolution of their pricing strategies, if you will. That can be overwhelming. Like, just knowing that, hey, even if I wanted to hire practitioners on my team, I would be realizing them at, I don't know, 2 to 3 years later. It can be very difficult to get started. Right now, there are a lot of like, tools in the FinOps space. And if you look around it, the landscape is so broad that I don't know, maybe there is literally hundreds of tools. How do I know which one should I be like, picking? Like, is there like, recommended one? Which one, like, should people like, are going with? Some of them also offer transactional benefits, meaning like, spot optimizations as opposed to kind of like, more of a holistic engagement. Those are kind of like, difficulties, and people are always like, asking like, hey, Jordan, like, is there something that you would recommend that would fit my particular, like, problem space? And unfortunately, the usual answer is, well, it depends on what you're trying to optimize. Like, let's start with the problem statements and then work backwards from there before we sort of like, make specific recommendations. Finally, FinOps is a relatively young movement in the industry. The number of available practitioners who are well versed in the practice. I'm not even like, referring to certifications, but if you want to use that as that's also like, viable. It's relatively low still, especially when I compare it with the actual number of businesses that actually have that need. Got the level of complexity of somebody who is trying to do something with multi-cloud. Well, now the complexity increased from it's almost exponential. It's like squared. It's not 2x anymore. It's like squared. And then if you have like a fourth provider, then it becomes cube as opposed to it becoming like 3x the problem space. To me, those are kind of like the most common ones that I see organizations struggle with.
So generally, when you enter this optimization landscape, what is the first reason to even think of optimizing? Is it because we are seeing a lot of wastage, or is it because the CFOs are under pressure to get the bottom line better, or is it because you just want to bring that hygiene into the team?
Yeah, usually it's an initiative that the business wants to drive. As you mentioned, like the CFO, it doesn't necessarily have to be the CFO, but sometimes it may be a technology topic that springs up and then kind of like spills into the business. It doesn't really matter where it starts, but I think the main goal for businesses should be that you need to involve and sort of like create a cross-functional group, meaning it's not just, I don't know, maybe a part of your team, maybe it's the infrastructure or the platform team's sole responsibility to work with finance and optimizing that. Their role should be to evolve, like help evolve the culture with the CTO, the CPO, the CIO, and maybe even the CEO and the CFOs, kind of like buying and oversight to evolve the culture. So you have like local autonomy for each individual team, so you can level up the culture and sort of like allow teams to have the end-to-end ownership of the products that they're building. Yeah, if you don't set it up that way, you're always going to have a little bit of a dislocated incentives in terms of who owns what, and you might be able to see that level. It's not going to be like the right type of, I don't know, a cultural outcome. You'll still require a lot of, I would say, prodding, maybe even mandates, kind of like hard goals and requirements, as opposed to those kind of like becoming recurring activities within a team's life cycle.
Jordan, now about just the optimization process. Let's just say a company has decided to optimize their cloud, right? Which means now there's going to be a lot of changes that's going to happen. And with any change, there is a risk of an incident, generally. What is your advice to get the teams to really prepare for this? And how do you manage this, at least at a tolerable risk level?
Start small and do your discovery, identify the right types of opportunities that may give you the biggest bang for the buck with the lowest amount of effort, right? Maybe like you only need to do is like, spend 20% energy to get 80% of the outcome. That's perfectly acceptable. And many organizations go through that. After you are developing sort of like, achieving those outcomes, you develop the organizational muscle. Maybe you start creating a set of best practices, sharing those across different groups and teams. Maybe you're documenting them. Maybe you're coming up with concepts of like, sprint captains or champions. maybe you have like localized owners for particular type of P&L. It's you can just keep doing that as you kind of grow along. But the goal is to kind of hey, start small and safe. Use the SLAs and SOIs that you have established. Make sure you have the right type of rigor around incident management. You have the ability to roll back quickly. You can recover quickly from incidents. That will basically provide you with the right type of guardrails of how to get the successful outcomes you're looking for without necessarily introducing too much risk.
Now, let's assume there was something called Cloud Olympics, right? What would be an item that you would be the champion?
Maybe the best analogy, at least visually, that comes to mind is pole vault, in the sense of whenever you're moving away from physical data centers to the public cloud, it really feels like, hey, I'm gonna run with my pole vault. I want to take a big leap. Hopefully, I go over this really big hurdle, and then I'm gonna shoot for a soft landing. Maybe that's the one. I mean, I've done this exercise. It's I don't know a few times at scale with different organizations. So to me, maybe that's maybe that's something that I probably excel at.
And generally, when this move is happening right now, right? Now there are, in fact, two movements, one from public to private, the other is from private to public, right? And private to public, I'm thinking is mostly triggered with this cost shocks. And when they transition, what skill do you expect that leader to acquire or process to make that movement successful?
I think it really is. It's a little bit less about the size of the team, but the actual business goals, and then onto the composition and the skill sets available on the team. Can we actually do this? It's not just about setting the goal, but can we actually make this in practice? For some organizations, it could be cloud expatriation. For others, it could be getting into the cloud. Yeah, you will still need the same type of practitioners. I believe the industry data suggests that we are somewhere between 40/60 or 50/50 on this is private cloud spend. But we haven't necessarily kind of crossed the chasm. Even though the public cloud has been around for I don't know a decade and a half now, or maybe close to 2 decades. So it's still not necessarily a fully realized space. And to me, it would be hey, do I actually have the right team who can help me pull that off? And when I say the team, that is people who have the right type of skill sets, they have the right type of relationships within the organization, then organizational culture, they know how to actually make that happen. While we could leverage third party, I don't know, help in terms of consulting, maybe something else to the table, but I don't necessarily have those internal connections that help you actually achieve this in reality. You're always going to need that sort of connective tissue.
And I remember you had a very successful initiative in terms of cost optimization in the past. I know you cannot share all the specifics, but without the specific, can you give us a rundown on how exactly you achieved it? What were the main challenges and what was the outcome?
We had a relatively short timetable. I was given a task to identify a certain amount of optimizations by way of a new senior leadership that I had just come on board. Maybe that's an ask within their first 2 to 3 months. So I have a relatively new leadership chain, complex space. We had just completed our transition into the cloud. So we did have some opportunities, but the business was looking to realize the vast majority of those gains in a span of, I would say, 6 to 9 months. That felt like a challenge, but I think knowing the environment, I basically had to work with a lot of different leaders within the team that I was leading, and I was obviously across the aisle with my product partners. And I told them, look, the timeline is relatively short. How about we have 6 weeks of initial discovery of what we can do? Just jot down the opportunities. How long do you think it's going to take in terms of actual implementation or efforts? What do you think the actual opportunity in terms of cost savings would be? And then we can sit down and talk about which ones we should be able to prioritize. Now, we were able to complete a discovery, execute on it. We were able to deliver the realized the actual requested targets and a little bit over, which obviously landed us in a very good spot. Internally, that was a success. However, I distinctly remember the post-mortem for that effort where I said, well, this should not be a one-time exercise. That's something that we're able to do continuously and on an ongoing basis to which a lot of people nodded their heads at the time, but maybe we didn't necessarily either have the culture or the tools to practice that on a continuous basis. And maybe this particular experience covers a little bit more some of the responses that I mentioned earlier in the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jordan, for joining us here. It was great insights, great steps to really start the journey, and great sample outcomes too. So it was a pack of everything that the industry really wanted. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.